and much talked about topic, how sustainability can deliver benefits for business and environment. To discuss the panel, I would like to invite on stage Manoj Chura, Chief Procurement Officer from Holcim, Gaurav Arora, General Manager Procurement from Stelis Biopharma Private Limited, Punit Jagatramka, Executive Vice President JSW, Kanishk Negi, Director Procurement Sustainability from Schneider Electric, Ashish Tripathi, Global Head of Purchase Logistics and Agency, Tom Shipping, Ashwani Narang, Vice President and Country Head from SAP, Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman, Institute of Supply Chain Management, and I would also like to invite on stage the panel chair, Shanmukh Singh, Consultant ISCM, to lead the discussion ahead. Welcome everybody. Let's hear it for them.
Hello. Good afternoon to all. As has been discussed today, procurement has become one of the most core strategic functions in business supply chains all over the world, and more so since the start of the pandemic. With the collapse of traditional supply chains, there is an increasing need to modernize procurement. There's a lot of demand for end-to-end view of spend, and this visibility that suddenly has emerged from nowhere is creating a call for how sustainable is your procurement function. Which brings me to the first question of the day. What is sustainability in the procurement function look like? Anyone can take up this question. All the questions are open-ended.
I think I'll go first. My name is Manoj Chura and
Sure.
I represent Holcim here. I think sustainability in any business is basically need of the hour. It's basically doing the right thing, and that could be leaving the planet in a better shape or the same shape, at least the way we came. Sustainability also things like would say that how do we ensure that proper wages are given, the compliances to these government authorities, and of course the sustainability is the buzzword for all the importers, some of the exporters we have got. So of course sustainability now becoming more of a need or a requirement of doing business as compared to saying that sustainability is a separate need. It's a requirement of doing business now.
Anyone else wants to add something?
Yeah, maybe I can add it. Kanishk Negi from Schneider Electric. Completely agree with Manoj what he said. In fact, if you look at procurement, sustainability for procurement is not only making sure that our suppliers are doing the right things, they are having the right kind of, let's say, setup infrastructure, but also to look at what kind of materials we are procuring. Not only look at the working conditions, not only look at the environmental impact of our suppliers when they are operating, but also look at what kind of materials we are purchasing, what kind of life cycle impact those materials have when they are being used or when they are being disposed. Increasingly, we are forced to look at the materials which have, let's say, lesser carbon footprint, right from the cradle to grave, which have a lower impact on biodiversity, which are, let's say, more circular in their nature, so they do not generate waste. And that also calls for a lot of upstream collaboration from procurement side. So collaboration with departments like engineering, R&D, collaboration with technical departments, where we have to engage and discuss what is the validity of a material which is being used, how much can we push the boundaries of the technical tolerance for XYZ materials. We need to engage with them. We need to also engage with our suppliers in many cases to co-develop these materials, because a lot of times these materials are not available. So I would say sustainability is also asking procurement to push the boundaries, go beyond the traditional, let's say, perception of a function which is ensuring availability of material at the right cost, with the right quality. I think sustainability asks us to take a much more of a driving seat where we are involved in much more strategic discussions within the organization. So, I mean, that's how I look at sustainability within procurement.
Thank you, Kanishk. Yeah.
Good afternoon, all. The sustainability, how we look at it is, it's more of a future proofing. How do you sustain the business? What are the criteria we need to follow? So in procurement function, it is more to do with the supplier code of conduct, how the human rights, all the labor laws, compliance, and things like so on are integrity are well in place and people are committed so that the business is sustained either from the front of supplier point of view and from the buyer's point of view. Sustainability also means how do you conserve, whatever emissions you have, how can we reduce, how do you conserve the water usage, how can you reduce the consumption of energy, how can you also use the waste heat, whatever is being generated. So all sorts of conservation and less emission is a sustainability. And eventually it's your brand, how are you seen by the globe and how are you seen by your supplier and customer. So eventually it's a necessity, and without sustainability, business will be at a risk. So it's very important. One is the supply security is fine, but if you are ensuring all this parameter, your supplier will be able to sustain and you also will be able to survive. And we all have seen in this last 2-3 years, people have gone through all sorts of a cycle. Nothing is available, whatever you want to buy. So better to conserve, better to have it produced within the India. We don't know what will happen next, and surprises are always there. So as much as possible in a sustainable supply chain mechanism and production to be should be developed within India.
Thank you, Puneet. Coming to the actions that we are taking towards sustainability, when I ask most professionals or most leaders in the industry, how important is sustainability to you and your business? They say very. The next question I ask is, how much are you investing? Very little. Why is there so much misalignment in the whole action and call strategy?
So, hello. Yeah, good afternoon all. And thanks first to ISCM for having us. My name is Ashish Tripathi. I'm representing a Danish company by name Tom. Since we see a lot of brands, whom we use daily, so it will take a little longer just to tell about ourselves. We are a Danish company, 135-year-old. We have about 80 ships, which is owned by us, and we run them. Mostly companies which you see in India is probably ship managed, which will be like an aggregator, but in our case, we own those ships and we run them. The businesses which we are into is to move naphtha, aviation turbine fuel. We heard about veg oil. So all over the world, and that, as I think most of us know, 90% of the trade moves by the ships. And that throws a peculiar problem for us, not on the man front, which we will come to, but is also on the, the sustainability or the carbon neutrality of the things. And coming to the question where you said, why are you, you say it is important, what are the seriousness? So if I talk about us now, in the last 2 years or so, we have a department entirely named as a carbon emission, which is as a sustainable group, as a team entirely, which is working on that. And if I talk about what exactly we do in that is to ensure, and then there are various sort of projects which you take, and that is where procurement comes into picture, because you don't know you're venturing into unknown territory. One of the things, again, on the emission part, like it was mentioned, for us is to reduce the emission, because though we account for about 3% of the global emission, so how do you do that? You install scrubbers, which is a very sort of, put it like a technical machinery. When you emit, your carbon footprints are reduced drastically. But that is again a capital expenditure. As a group, we decided that fitting a scrubber can cost you around 5 to 7 million, which might be again, something for a business case, whether should be, again, it was a dilemma going back and forth, very limited vendors and that is where, say, procurement comes into picture to source out those equipments for. And when we sort of completed what we decided, 80 ships, out of that around 40 will go, sort of having the half fleet with these scrubbers about 2 years back. And when we completed, we were representing only 1% of the global fleet which had scrubber. And now when we were talking about the oil, Girish was mentioning, how important it is. Because what happens is that in case if you don't have that scrubber, if I go a little detail, is then you need to use the lighter fuel, which is your gas oil. And what we use is a HFO. So then now with the HFO and the scrubber on, we could, 2 years back there was hardly any margin. And now what we are making sort of a difference apart from the carbon footprints is very different than what it was 2 years back. So now you can see the payback period. And then suddenly, it is very difficult for a ship which needs to run for about 25 years. You need to come up with innovation, but you have a shelf life of maybe remaining 12, 15 years. So how do you ensure that, that business continuity is there? Another thing which we have taken very seriously, and I was just trying to sort of read through, I know that Unilever has committed to 2050 carbon neutrality. So that we are also part of it, but also being a little more aggressive is that by 2030, what was supposed to be our target to reduce our carbon footprint by 40%, we have pushed it to 2025. So by 2025, we want to reduce our carbon footprint by 40%. And then there are various sort of projects where we taken as a technical team, and that is where expertise of procurement comes into picture. Where do you source those equipments? 40 plus projects, some will fly, some will not. But how do you ensure that you provide them the best of services, the retrofits which we do, continuity for the services. So there are various things. And having said that, I think ESG will, going forward, at least in our segment, we can see when we try to finance a ship, which could be about 70 to 80 million, in Europe specifically I'm talking about, they go by what is your carbon footprint. And I'm pretty much sure going forward that will be the thing which will, not just because you want to do for the good of the planet, but like you said, right, how serious you are, it will also be driving your numbers going forward. So it will be, you need to fall in the place, so it's better you be prepared for it rather than, be unprepared beforehand.
Okay. But what I get a feeling is sustainability is more about convenience than necessity. And the need of the hour is certainly to save. COP26 failed. And the call for COP26 was, this is our last chance. So is partial sustainability enough, or do we need end-to-end sustainability?
I think it is not something you can do single-handedly. There has to be an entire ecosystem around it. So if I say I want to be sustainable around it, I need to also have the main engines or the fuels which I want to use for, So I want to say that I want to, but it needs to be the entire ecosystem which needs to be lifted. And then that is where Manish is not here, who was supposed to be. So it would have been interesting to hear from Mars, because they are also driving. And we are though we are competitor globally, but we have partnered with them in terms of, they have set up in Denmark a center basically on this one. And in that is, how do you move next, not just to your suppliers, but to the next level and to lift the entire ecosystem. And it is easier said than done. You can't do it alone. It needs to be, the party needs to be joined by everybody,
I absolutely, completely agree with what Ashish said. I think there is no doubt that someone can say, I'm only focusing on one element of sustainability and that's enough for me, and I'll not go any further. Basically, you can't say I'm saving the environment, but I'm harming the people, and that's all right. Or you can say I'm saving the people, but I'm, polluting the environment, and I'm not bothering about the emissions. That doesn't work. So when you talk about sustainability, it has to be end-to-end, and it has to be holistic. It has to cover all the elements of ESG. Environment has to be covered fully. Organizations cannot cherry pick the issues that they feel convenient and they feel, let's say, comfortable about. They have to look at their full scope of impact. They have to look at the kind of interface that they have with various touch points on the resource use, on the communities, on the entire value chain that they have. And then only they have to develop a full scope strategy to address each of those points. If someone says, I have a great environmental strategy, but I'm not focusing upon the human rights, that's partial. You can't really go along with that. So it has to be end-to-end, it has to be holistic. It can't be partial or halfway.
And, if I look at the literal Hindi meaning of sustainability, it means tikau. I think it runs in Indians' blood. Yeah. So if you talk about sasta, sundar, and tikau, So probably the gentleman from ITC, he made sure the biscuit looks sundar, and probably we are everywhere here in the room trying to make the world more tikau. And that's where I think what I would ask the, on a side note, the ITC gentleman, is the biscuit sasta now also? Because you dropped the prices. So maybe that's a question later on for the tea. But then, see, if you look at sustainability, I think the investments sooner or later have to flow in. The simple point is India has its first sustainable panchayat now, which has been recognized as Village Palli. That's in Jammu and Kashmir. If you have not read that, we already have the first sustainable panchayat in India. And that's where I think the government is flowing in money to make sure that the sustainability goals are achieved end to end. There's going to be enough and a lot of pressure on all of us to make sure we actually reproduce. Or let's say we talk about circular economy or circular supply chain. And there's a staggering fact, and this is for all of us. I think procurement or supply chain is become, even more important in today's scenario. A report says that 80% of emissions, carbon emissions, are done because of supply chain movement, end-to-end supply chain movement. So we alone in this room are making sure something is going from one place to the other, whether it is for production or for distribution, and we are actually getting the environment polluted. And that's why procurement is having probably a major stake into sustainability. And we need to make sure that we do a better job in order to have zero emissions. So the money is going to flow in. There's no partial way of doing it. I can't live partially, so I have to live fully, and therefore sustainability is full. And probably the last fact, if you look at it, there's going to be $3 trillion, which is going to be flowing in the next 5 years to make sure sustainability becomes real, is a part of our life. Okay, and my friend from JSW, Puniji, you would have more insights because you won the sustainability award as well recently. So
Yes.
So that's how I would put it, on sustainability.
Thank you. So he was asking whether it's a necessity or not. So as per me, it's definitely a necessity. The sustainability, the commitment of the company has to be there. So just wanted to highlight, everyone wants to grow, everyone wants to expand. So what we have done as a company, we are the first still global company who has gone and raised a sustainability linked bond $500 million. So that was possible because we made a commitment, the carbon emission, what we have in the steel making, we will be getting it down to 1.95 kg per ton of a crude steel from 2.4 to what we are today. So that's the level of commitment everybody will have to make. And we are also recognized by the World Steel in third consecutive year as a sustainable champion. There is a CDP rating also. There also we are enjoying the leadership level, which is the A, B, C, D. So we are at A minus. So we are one of the steel company who is at the leadership level in India now. And likewise, our foundation, JSW, is also ISO 26000. So all these credentials will help you in terms of expanding, growing. Your supply security will also depend. There are carbon emission related scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, wherein your customer and supplier also have to comply. So this is going to become a necessity, or already it's a necessity because everybody wants to grow. So as per me, sustainability has a value, and eventually it will result in definitely a lot of cost reduction, which everybody is looking for. When you start looking how do you conserve, like how do you reduce the wastage. So for an example, in the metal and mining with the industry which I come from, how you can improvise the recovery, how you can reduce the energy consumption, how you can beneficiate all kinds of ore which is going into making of the steel, especially the iron ore. So we, in all the locations, we have the beneficiation. We are coming up another beneficiation in Odisha, so that we are able to extract whatever Fe contained in the lowest grade of the iron ore is available. In terms of a transportation also, we are laying the pipelines, and all the slurry in the iron ore, that will be transported by the pipeline. We have already big pipeline set up in Karnataka. Now we will be setting up in Odisha also. So these are the steps in terms of a projects you were mentioning. So unless you take up the projects as a commitment, you will always have a roadblock. The stakeholders, shareholders, everybody is watching you, including your customer also would be demanding the same. So it's a necessity and it's a commitment has to be there.
And I can also add, very rightly put, that in addition to the customer requirement, because we at Schneider, we do use a lot of steel, and we have a program wherein we are looking at steel which is green, and lower carbon footprint of the steel is one of the criteria. There are other elements, how we qualify, how we define. So, I mean, it's absolutely a pull from the customer, but also if you look at the regulatory environment has also changed drastically. In the last 10 to 15 years, globally, right from the Americas region to Australia, there have been more than 10 or 15 regulations which have come in place, which are aiming at the companies who are having a global supply chain. And one of, or let's say two common threads which are there in all of these regulations, irrespective of the country that they come from, is companies have to do a due diligence of their supply chain globally. It doesn't matter whether I have a presence in that country or not. If my supplier is present, located there, I need to have a due diligence of that supplier, both on the environmental issues as well as on the social issues, on the worker rights, etc. And once I do that, I also need to disclose the hotspots or the trouble areas in a public disclosure. And I have to comment on it, what am I doing to let's say, address those concerns, to remediate the situation. 15 years back, there was no talk in terms of regulatory environment of sustainability. Now there are countries in Europe who have linked the sustainability performance of the companies with the trade instruments. So if you are not having these considerations in your value chain or in your supply chain operations, then you may not even qualify for doing business in certain geographies. So there is a very sharp focus now, and it's going to only increase in the future, in the coming years. So it's regulatory as well.
I think I just want to add to that one. I think regulatory is one thing and need is another thing. But the other point we need to keep in mind is this is available, some of these things are available for free. Talk about the solar, talk about wind. Once you have put the installations, it's a really significant amount of difference in the cost of operation of these things as compared to a coal-fired power plant or a grid power plant. So I think if you have something available and it's a one-time investment, it's going to give us a ongoing benefits, and we can leave the planet in a better shape than what it is today. Why not?
And I absolutely agree, Manoj. In fact, if I look at the operations of Schneider Electric, this has been one of the driving forces for us as well. I mean, sustainability is nothing but being more efficient. Yeah. Being more efficient with the resources that we use, being more efficient with the energy that we use, being more efficient with the material, with the waste that we are generating. All of it, if you look at, is making us much more efficient, reducing the cost of operations. And it's a simple business sense. You basically tighten the belt, cut all the inefficiencies, and that makes you sustainable. There are around 200 locations of Schneider around the world, Schneider Electric. As of end of last year, 50 of those sites, the manufacturing plants and all, they were net zero carbon emission, which means they ran completely on the clean fuel, on the renewables, on the clean energy. They did not use any fossil fuel for their operations. And all the investment decisions, be it CapEx or OpEx, which was involved, it was all, I mean, when we look at the return on investment, it was within the normal 2 to 3 years of, return. So that also brings the fact that it's not costly. I mean, there used to be a perception that if you want to be sustainable, it's probably a costly thing. You're gonna, invest a lot of money. There's not going to be enough return. But all of that is history now. There are proven cases wherein if you are sustainable, you make money, you save money.
Especially when you talk about the coal prices going up and diesel prices going up. So.
Absolutely.
We are running short on time, so if we can adhere to the 2 minute per answer, that would be great. So, yeah, sustainability initiatives are built on 3 pillars: collaboration, visibility, and transparency. We spoke about collaboration right now, but how do we build transparency and visibility in our systems?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So, we are talking about transparency. Before that, I would like to touch upon one more important point, which is very related to sustainability, is ethics. So we are missing somewhere because in terms of so many concept change need is required for the all Indian industries. So we are already a 5-10 year late in terms of the expectation of world which is looking to us in terms of volumes, in terms of quality, in terms of the products and global footprint. Most of our morning session panelists has spoke about the China de-risking and all those. So it's a very great opportunity already we have for India, and only the concept approach has to be realigned from the management side, where we need to see how can procurement and then sustainability department can contribute in those kind of requirements. One of the panelists in the morning was saying that CEO's objectives are not aligned with the procurement head's objectives. Now, if you are not changing the concept approach of your organization from top to bottom, you will not be going to give that kind of importance to your procurement head, who is going to contribute a lot in that. Building a transparency in terms of there are tools available where the SAP and all those, given the examples, how can they contribute in the terms of transparency. However, one more point which I would like to touch upon, which is missed right now, is human resources, because it's when we talk about ethics, it's more on resources, whether it is material or manpower and all. Please don't waste your resources, because some companies are struggling for the resources. They are not getting the material on time. They are not getting people on right place. And if you have those, please don't waste the resources. At least, if you are not able to give them a kind of opportunity into the right way, please align your resources, which are very needful and which are very aligned to your objectives. So that's how you have to transparent from your management top to bottom itself, so that you can serve the objectives which entire world is looking for right now from India. That's all my thought.
And I think that's an extremely important point, because if there is no alignment from what the top management thinks right through the organizational structure, nothing's going to move. We may talk about anything, but if it's not within the radar of the top management or the company leadership, it's not going to make any difference. We probably can spend hours talking about the need of it, but it's not going to move forward. So it's extremely important how the leadership defines the sustainability strategy and how that is then taken and absorbed through the organization up to the procurement. And procurement is one of the most important organizations, because we have a tremendous multiplier effect. With one program, one initiative, we touch upon hundreds of suppliers, hundreds of companies who can be who will implement, let's say, the actions which are asked for. So the alignment is extremely, extremely important. The embedding within the organizational plans, be it annual, be it 5-yearly, those specifics have to be worked upon. Otherwise, it's going to be just, let's say, as people say, greenwash.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Kanishk. My next question is interesting and tragic at the same time. Are supply chain disruptions a curse or a boon to furthering the objectives of sustainability?
All right, let me take this. Most often, we have been talking about sustainability from a silos perspective. And this has been an exercise which essentially is based on my reporting for ESG or CDP. Most companies adopted this because for this reason. Now is the time when I say that disruption is a curse or boon. I think it's a curse for all of them who will not adopt it. It's a boon for all of them who are going to adopt it. First fundamental thing that we really need to realize is that you can divide the whole framework into 3 different parts. 1, managerial. 2, behavioral. 3, operational. And I think we mess up with all the 3 in a big way, not understanding the interaction between the 2. Why managerial? I think if I ask a question to everybody here, how many of you are part of the sustainability initiative, because it cannot be driven by one lead of sustainability. Two, how many organizations practice SNOP or IBP where sustainability sits in a more prominent way in the organization? Three, how many of us have married both sustainability and operational activities in a big way? Because it is there that the first thing starts. And while we take up a very holistic macro view of sustainability, we miss on the transition in terms of operational, managerial, and strategic framework. And hence, if you see some companies, I just spoke to someone today in the morning also, I won't name it, but there's a lot of things that happens. Oh, my parent company in US or in Germany does it, so we have a sustainability lead. Now that's one element. Maybe I'm saying the exception to the rule. Two, large number of us do not understand that it's the operational sustainability which is important. And I think this is where a lot of us criticize these so-called IT tools, not understanding that an effective use of the new modern visibility tools, and I'm just leaving it there because I cannot define anything more, provide a framework for us to reduce carbon footprint by becoming more operationally efficient. How many of us have looked at our networks of logistics, procurement logistics, as a source of change? How many of us have looked downstream, that is scope 3, logistics, distribution channel design changes? All of us operate with the same, what I call it as same distribution channel, where there is so much of blindness in that. There's so much of bullwhip. And now we are operating bullwhip backside with all these things. So I think I would say that there are three fundamental things that we need to have. Behavioral by training, which we don't do it. Managerial by building a great orchestration and synchronization of aligned processes. We talk about SNOP. I think Girish, my colleague, and I went to a training program of a very large cement company. We asked them, what is your SNOP? So they said, brilliant, we work on SOP numbers. And then in the process of running a case study, he says that we also have a dynamic SNOP. What was this? Any demand comes and sales comes from the business, we cater to it. Amazing, right? And this is where we mess up on everything called operational and sustainability. But there is a lot of pressures, there are companies which are showing a right direction to it. And I think they're mixing the three, trying to understand. It's a time when sustainability has just started to put pressure on everybody to rethink, and hence may not be the right time to judge it.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. My next question is, what is the role of procurement in the circular supply chain to promote sustainability?
If I may add, I think a bit on the previous point what
Sure.
Doctor made is, I think there are two sides to it. One is, of course, a big spend, a big bang thing which you need to do. But there are a lot of sort of a low-hanging fruit, as we say. And if I come to our cases, the same thing. We have been operating since a Danish company. Hub and spoke model. We have warehouses all over the world, majority. But the hub was in Denmark, which was northern of Denmark. And in the last, I don't know for how many years we were operating from that. And then in the last 2 years, maybe again because of the COVID, that was sort of a limited option north of Denmark, the connectivity, the vessels are calling about 670 unique ports. And since we are on spot market, we need to plan for unplanned when we are doing connections to run these ships. And that is where we moved our hub from, say, Aalborg to Rotterdam, and that made a part of our ESG report because the number of trucks which we used to deliver from Aalborg to Rotterdam or to the other things reduced drastically. So that is a big bang one. If I talk a smaller one, again, the key ports were Singapore, Rotterdam, Fujairah, Japan, Korea. We make it as a part of our contracts to the suppliers that, when we do, imagine a Amazon or Flipkart guy coming with so much of packaging material that is just for one house. Imagine for the same being delivered for a ship, So the amount of packaging and dunnage material becomes, because if you see, ship is one of the most expensive real estate or a moving warehouse, so you don't want to stuff your ship with unwanted things. And that becomes a part of contract which we do with that you need to take those packaging and dunnage materials back with you It might be a cost at the end to have that boat standby, but then it will make a very green sort of, because then at the mid of ocean where you want to dispose that of, there is no way, right? So those type of things, there is always a big bang which you can do, but when you try to study your value chain entirely, you will always find some things which could be. A quick one again, bottled water. We were now drinking a lot of bottled water here, right? But imagine that drinking 365 days, and that is what we have on board the ship. And now we read the latest article, you could find microplastics in your blood, right? So to sell it to the seafarers, that this is the purest form, even better than what you have, because we generate water on board the ship using the best of processes with the evaporation, But to sell that idea, and now to, impart that, because 10 lakh plus bottles which we consume every year. So I think there is a lot of scope which is there. It is just that we need to understand, whether be in terms of visibility, which you spoke, and then try to pick it up, and I'm sure we can make a difference.
If I may add very quickly, disruption is a very relative term, I would say, in today's world. If you see, it is a boon for probably metals industry, a bane for probably consumer industry, and pharma would say it is fine, I'm getting affected in some way, but on the other hand, I'm selling too much as well in terms of drugs. But I think it is affecting the bottom line for everyone. So I think there is opportunity in adversity, as everyone would say. We should look at it positively, and we should see what kind of impact we can create. And going back to the basics, we should procure with purpose. That is how I keep repeating. So it's something which can bring boon or bane in a relative term, but it's an opportunity, and we should look up to it.
Absolutely, and touching upon the point which Dr. Singh also made, operational integration is one of the hardest to achieve, because there you have to overcome the barrier, the training of people, the capacity building, the psychological barrier which people have, and that is the hardest. The processes have to be revisited. New evaluations have to be done. Like when we have our logistics and downstream, we now have included a model. There is a network modeling team which sits, and whenever there is a warehouse or a distribution center, and when they are mapping it, they incorporate the factor of carbon emission into the decision and deciding whether the product should be manufactured in X or Y location, and what would be the distribution zone, and what will be the carbon effect of that. So like that, there are several improvisations which need to be done within the existing processes of procurement. And how do you bring those? How do you make people unlearn the things that they have already embedded? That is probably the hardest one. And that's where comes the linkage with the leaderships or the alignment. It's extremely important that there is a core strategy of the organization, and connected with that is the supply chain or procurement strategy. We in Schneider Electric have key thematic areas or key trends on sustainability mapped, and every function, not just procurement, but every function has to map their interface with those key mega trends. And then when we look at our operational plan, those mega trends have to reflect in those operational plans, and then it will cascade down into the annual improvement plan. Not just for one country, not just for one division, but globally for the entire organization, be it whichever region they are sitting in. And that's why in Schneider Electric, we have a dedicated core group within procurement, which is called sustainable procurement. The role and the responsibility of this group is to make sure there is this alignment, the programs are deployed, there are enough KPIs, people are aware of it, and the executions are done. And not only that, in fact, ensuring the accountability to these is also extremely important. And for that matter, when we look in Schneider Electric, when we look at the financial incentives or the bonus that the people get, 20% of that is connected with the performance of sustainability. If the group doesn't achieve the sustainability target, the top managers, the middle managers, everybody will be impacted. Their financial incentives will be impacted. So by these interventions in the processes, in the way organization operates, in the governance, sustainability has been integrated within the entire organization.
Thank you for bringing about challenges in the whole process of sustainability to procurement. how big is the external environment a challenge to achieving sustainability?
Can you elaborate that a bit?
So the whole ESG, environment, society, governance.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to add on geography and geopolitics, the G part of it.
Mm-hmm.
How big of a challenge is this? To
I
the
think
whole-
it's extremely huge challenge because not every not every geography perceives these topics in equal amount of sensitivity. Some may feel these are irrelevant things. Some may feel these are extremely important things. And when you are operating a global supply chain, you have to factor in suppliers from all part of geography that you're operating. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to focus on one segment where people are sensitive about it. I'm not going to procure from the other region. I mean, business doesn't work like that. So one of the biggest challenges is to make sure the suppliers realize and the suppliers understand the sensitivity around these topics. So what is the perception of the society in their country on those issues, on those topics? Do people perceive it as acceptable to operate by violating certain things? And is it generally accepted practice? So these things are extremely, extremely important, and we have to break those perceptions. And that's where procurement's role comes, the role of our buyers who are interacting in each of these geographies with these suppliers comes into picture. Because the buyer will not listen to what a global guy says or what the code of conduct says or what the website of the customer says. They will listen what the guy who's clearing their invoices, who's sending the PO, who's clearing their bills, what is he saying? Who's sitting next to who's sitting with them on the negotiation table? What priorities is that buyer telling the supplier? That is what is going to make an impact, and that's why it's extremely important to make sure the procurement fraternity understands why it's important to focus on the topics of sustainability. And not just as a buzzword sustainability, we have to break it down operationally into their day-to-day activities. What benefit it has to them if the supplier is not polluting, if he is respecting worker rights. So there are all these issues which have to be factored in, and there cannot be an ad hoc treatment to these issues. We have to embed it within the organization's culture, and then only we can achieve those requirements.
We talked about logistics. He also pointed on the ESG in terms of environmental, social, compliance, or a responsibility. The moment we start thinking in those lines, you will start coming up many number of projects. So for an example, everybody wants to reduce the fuel consumption when we move the material. So all the initiatives are eventually giving us a lot of cost benefit. Whatever we were moving by road in terms of incoming of the bulk raw material, if you are able to have the railway network or the things rightly set up, so it has a substantial fuel reduction. Within the premise, which is the scope 1, whatever material you have been moving, you set up the right conveyor system in the place, and whatever vessel he was referring in terms of a shipping, how bigger vessel you can move so that lesser fuel consumption. So we felt and we have experienced there is a substantial cost saving also happening with the environmental and social commitment. Socially, all the companies are responsible. So best way of transparency could be go and be a member of the Dow Jones Index, Sustainability Index, which we are. So it is showing us a new way of doing the business. At the same time, also improving your efficiency, recovery, cost, and everything. And finally, companies at large, society at large, environmentally, everything is being benefited. Classic example, we were looking for a source, who is not generating power through thermal. But everybody says it may be costly. But we found in Bhutan, the power cost because of hydro is very less. So we could develop several sources of supplies. It is cost effective also, and it is friendly in terms of power usage, what they have. It's not thermal. We ourselves have very recently, about a month back, have commissioned 285 megawatt wind power. And slowly as a company, we are going to go away from the thermal power and go for the renewable power. So there also we are seeing a lot of benefits in terms of a solar and the wind, and benefits are coming in. So That's all. But I would also encourage any of you have any questions to be asked, because only he is asking us a question. So we would be happy to attend to any questions.
I have one question. Why, I don't know why people generalize this, but bigger ships do not mean they're sustainable, in my opinion. Yeah, lesser fuel consumption in shipping, but then you have to travel more on road, which leads to larger emission.
I think if I come with the sort of exposure we have in that is, again, comes to the visibility. You really need to first know, at the capacity, what is my fuel consumption, SFOC, on terms of carbon footprints of a particular vessel. So for us, and again, it can depend on various company to company. Say for our, every noon, 12 o'clock, we are aware that if this particular vessel is trading from Rotterdam or Ara to Japan, what is its fuel consumption for this day? And then if there is a deviation, we tell the vessel, you need to slow down. Because you are going ahead, we need not reach ahead there in time, maybe 6 hours, because there is a demurrage involved if you don't make it on time. So that is a different story. But again, like I said, it depends on the company, how forward you are into the value system of having that visibility. But that again, is an operational efficiency which you come to, and then that is what you sell it as a USP to your customers also. Because I have a control on my visibility as to how I operate my ships, and I ensure that I'll get your cargo delivered and to, meet that. Because more or less, there are so many different challenges coming to the geography part of it. You call California, you have a different requirement, in terms of what type of fuel you will be using, because that is the local, the mayor has posed that rule that is outside the state. And that specifically for shipping, since, like I said, about 700 different odd ports we got globally. That makes us very difficult as to keep track of these regulation. More so when in the COVID, sort of very difficult, when we could not even step down to get our groceries, the ships were moving. The crew was there on board, and how do you get them joining the ship? If I had to join a crew member in Dubai, he has to fly to Doha, take a flight to London, and then come to Dubai. That was the sort of, difficulties you had, but you had to, because you need to make that wheel running, right? And then how do you have that visibility again is that how do you measure it? And that is what makes it very difficult, but that is why we are here, right?
My next question is specifically for Ashmi. How is Procurement 5.0 leveraging co-innovation and partner-led innovation to optimize profitability and sustainability?
I think much has already been said, and whether you call Procurement 5.0 or you talk about Industry 4.0, we are getting into 5.0. I think partner innovation is becoming very important. And that's where, in the morning itself, when I had my first session, I was saying it is no more a linear supply chain. We are talking about supply chain networks. And that's where I think everybody is kind of mentioning, do you have visibility end-to-end into your suppliers? There was a recent report from Hackett, and it said in our tier 1 suppliers, 45% of the companies have visibility. When it comes to tier 2, it is a shocking 11%. So let's say if I am getting some raw material from somebody, a tier 2 supplier who is providing the raw material to tier 1 supplier, there is less than 11% visibility. When it comes to tier 3, less than 2%. Therefore, we have no idea of how our supply chain is evolving. And therefore, the visibility, or let's say the partner innovation, becomes more important. And probably to sum it up, if you have already seen a movie called Blood Diamond, it's going to be Blood Battery or Blood Lithium now happening in Africa. The ethics is going for a toss. We all are enjoying the era of, let's say, electric cars. Probably India is going to venture into hydrogen quicker than the electric, and that's what probably the government also wants. We want to be the leader now. We want to lead the way and say hydrogen is the next evolution. And that's where I think, again, partner innovation is coming in. And every customer you speak to, from coal gasification, and the other day I was hearing the MD of JSPL, and he said, use less steel. And that was an amazing argument. A steel company telling me, don't buy a lot of steel. And I asked him, why do you say that? And he said, because I'm going to hydrogen coat my steel so its life is more longer. And that's where, again, the partners are becoming more innovative. So to sum it up, I would say technology plays a great role, and that's the visibility we are providing back to our customers and the connection we are developing between the partners, or let's say the business partners, or let's say the customer and vendor. That's how I would put it. Thank you.
Coming to the last question for the day, is net zero enough? And if not, can we think of strategies to introduce complete end-to-end sustainability in the supply chain through procurement?
No, I think we have to look at it in a holistic manner. So only net zero is not enough to be sustainable. We have to look at all the elements. We can't ignore human rights. We can't ignore other elements of environmental impact. But also, I mean, net zero is extremely, extremely important and relevant now because our friends from Gurgaon or northern part of India, they know what kind of heat wave is there. And it's not normal. So climate change is there. And there is only, let's say, 8 years that we have if we want to make any kind of impact on the drastic change that we are going to experience in our lifetime. The temperatures, the global average temperatures are going to go up even up to 4 to 5 to 6 degrees Celsius if we do not make drastic change in the way we operate. Carbon emissions have to go down. And in fact, that is why a lot of our colleagues and friends have also targets of becoming carbon neutral, net zero. Schneider Electric also has this target of becoming net zero carbon emission by 2050. But that also means our supply chain will also have to become net zero. And when you translate that into simpler terms, that means our suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, even up to the mines, everybody has to operate on clean and renewable energy. They cannot use, or they will not or should not be using conventional fossil fuels. Now, how do you think this is going to happen? And that's where the engagement of supply chain, engagement of suppliers on carbon emission reduction is extremely important. Now, we at Schneider Electric have launched a zero carbon project wherein we have onboarded 1,000 suppliers and we are asking them to reduce their carbon emissions for the next 5 years, and then the overall ambition is to reduce by 50%. But even that is not enough. Engaging 1,000 suppliers is not enough. We have to do more. And how do we make that change? How do we orchestrate or improvise our procurement procedures so that this topic becomes important enough for the suppliers to include in their operational discussions? How does it become important enough so that it gets included into the buyer's KPIs and they ask the supplier to achieve these requirements within their operations?
Yeah. Can I request that we wrap it up because we are running behind and we have a drop-dead deadline for leaving this hall. And we have the function where all of us are eagerly waiting. So if you could quickly.
Thank you. I once asked a sustainability professional, what was the best initiative that you've ever come across? He said, my next one.
Good one. I think that's the spirit of which we approach sustainability. We did look at a lot of factors which affect sustainability. We talked about the managerial, the behavioral, and the operational issues within sustainability. We looked at the pressures, the drivers of sustainability, customers, investment, regulatory. We also talked about how we can build a collaborative, transparent, and visible supply chain that will track and let us know what is the kind of emissions that we are having and what's the kind of trouble that we are causing the environment. I think going forward, what the mantra is going to be is that sustainability will move from doing less harm to doing more good. On that note, I would like to thank all my speakers